Once again, good morning, everyone. My name is Lindsay Van Gerpen, and I'm a fairly new attorney for those who don't know me with OPC. Today, we're here for our second virtual workshop to continue the discussion of the OPC's proposed residential customer disconnection data reporting rule. Before we begin, I'd like to take a roll call just to get an idea of who's all on the line with us today. So I'll go through the commissioners and the utilities and the stakeholders. And if a representative could just say who all is on the line from your organization, that would be great. So we'll begin with the
Commissioner Holtzman's
commissioners.
here.
Good morning, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Are there any other commissioners on the line?
Commissioner Kochmeyer's here.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay, now we'll turn to the electric utilities. Is there anyone here from Ameren?
Yes, good morning. This is Jermaine Grubbs. I'm a regulatory counsel for Union Electric Company doing business as Ameren, Missouri. I'm joined by a few folks. First one is Mark Schlake. He's our senior manager of credit, customer advocacy, and revenue protection. Then I also have with me Paige Selby, who is manager of customer advocacy, and finally Aubrey Krishmar, who is a regulatory liaison for Ameren, Missouri. Thanks so much.
Good morning. Is there anyone here from Evergy?
Good morning. This is Sarah Gott from Evergy with Regulatory Affairs. Joining the discussion today, we have Brad Lutz, who's the Director of Regulatory Affairs, Jim Furneaux, who's a Manager of Regulatory Affairs, and Lisa Starkeybaum, also a Manager of Regulatory Affairs. From the customer support team, we have Julie Dragoo, Senior Director of Customer Strategy and Support, and also joining her is Stephen Glenn, who's the Manager of Customer Automation and Technology. From Customer Affairs, we have Maria Lopez, Manager of Customer and Community Affairs. And then also from the Contact Center, we have Penny Holman, Manager of Resource Planning and Business Intelligence, Sally Rose, Contact Center Supervisor, and Latanya Turk, Contact Center Supervisor as well. From Revenue Management, we have David Austin, who's Manager of Credit Management. And then also representing Evergy from a legal perspective is Jim Fisher. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone here from Liberty?
Hi, yes, this is Diana Carter for the Liberty Utilities. So that would be Empire District Electric, Empire District Gas, Mid-States Natural Gas, and then also Liberty Utilities Missouri Water. And with me from the customer support side, I have Angie Simpkin, Heather Edwards, and Haley Sermon. And also from the regulatory side, we have Charlotte Emery, Richard Reese, and Dana Liner.
Great, thank you. Good morning. So now we'll turn to the gas utilities. Is there anyone, I'm sorry, Diana, you said you're here on behalf of Liberty for gas utilities as well, correct?
Yes, it covers our electric, our 2 gas, and our water and wastewater.
Great, thank you. For Ameren, are the same representatives for Ameren Gas as well as Ameren Electric?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Is there anyone here from Spire?
Yes, Rachel Niemeyer, counsel for Spire, is attending today along with Christopher Gagliano, who is the Vice President of Customer Service, Julie Traxel, Manager of Tariffs and Rates, Connie Sanchez, Specialist in Consumer Services, William Odom, Manager of Credit and Collection, and Sally Vandergriff should be joining us as well.
Great, thank you. Good morning. We'll turn now to Summit Natural Gas.
Good morning. Yes, this is Charity Porterfield. I am Supervisor of Credit and Collections for Summit. Joining me today, we have Rachel Smith, who is our Regulatory Affairs Specialist.
Great, thank you. We'll turn now to the water utilities. Is there anyone here on behalf of Missouri American Water? Okay, we'll turn to Raytown Water. Is there anyone here for Central States Water Resources? Okay, are there any other water utilities on the line?
Hi there. Sorry, I just joined about 3 seconds ago, and I heard that question. I'm not sure if anybody else from American Water is on, but this is Paul from Missouri American Water.
Great, thank you. Good morning.
Hello.
We'll now turn to staff. Is there anyone from staff on the line?
Good morning, all. This is Jamie Myers with Commission staff. Joining me on the line is Jim Bush, staff director. We also have Contessa King, who's a manager of our customer experience department, as well as Scott Gaskow, who's a researcher and data analyst in our customer experience department.
Great, thank you. Now we'll turn to OPC. So like I said, this is Lindsay Van Gerpen. I'm an attorney with OPC. Joining me, I also have Jordan Seaver and Jeff Mark, as well as John Kleiser. So now we'll turn to the non-utility stakeholders. Is there anyone here from Sierra Club?
Yes, hi, I'm Jen DeRose, the new Beyond Coal campaign rep.
Great, thank you. Good morning. Is there anyone here from MECG? Renew Missouri? MIEC? And I think, did I hear someone from DE earlier?
Yes, this is Martin Hyman.
Thank you. Good morning. Is there anyone else on the line who has not yet been identified?
This is
Yes,
Andrew
good morning.
With,
Go ahead.
yeah, this is Andrew with Renew Missouri. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Good morning.
This is Morris Woodruff, judge for the commission. I'm also on the line.
And this is John Kaufman on behalf of the Consumers Council of Missouri.
And this is Jesse W. Craig from Bryden's Friends in England, co-counsel for American Water, Missouri American Water.
This is Travis Lincoln, Director of Revenue Management for Evergy.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good morning to everyone. Thank you again for being here today. So we'll go ahead and get started with our agenda. So beginning with the goals of today's workshop, I'd like to keep my presentation section here fairly short. Then we'll turn to the meat of today's workshop, which is an open discussion of our updated proposed rule. During that discussion, I'm hoping to hear your constructive feedback and suggestions for improvement. Because we'll have this open discussion, I do ask that everyone hold their comments until that time. Following today's workshop, I will send out a PDF version of this presentation and also upload it into EFIS. For today's presentation, I'd like to begin with a discussion of where we've been. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, this docket has been open for quite some time. Therefore, I'll start with a few slides discussing where we've been. After that, I'll turn to a short discussion of where we are now. Following that, I'll conclude with a discussion of next steps and then the open discussion of each section of the revised proposed rule. To begin, where have we been? So I'll break this part of the presentation down into 4 parts, beginning with the November 2019 NARUC resolution that began this process. Second, I'll discuss Dr. Jeff Mark's memorandum, which looked at the currently available information addressing customer disconnections in Missouri. Third, I'll give a brief highlight of the OPC's initial proposed rule. And finally, I'll conclude with a brief discussion of the November 2020 workshop. In November 2019, the OPC filed a motion to open this working group docket to discuss a proposed residential customer disconnection data reporting rule. In that motion, the OPC referred to a November 19th, 2019 NARUC resolution, which was passed following a 4-part webinar series during which panelists highlighted nationwide perverse problems contributing to inconsistent data reporting related to utility disconnections and delinquencies. This resolution recognized several things, including the high energy burdens for low-income households, the fact that there is often insufficient funding to meet the needs of these individuals, that due to that fact, these low-income households often postpone important purchases, even going without medical or dental care in order to pay utility bills. The resolution recognized that both NARUC and NSUCA recognize the value of evidence-based policymaking to improve outcomes for both utilities and customers, and that data collection and sharing that information is important. Therefore, the resolution called upon interested parties to work to standardize the collection of data. It also encouraged all interested parties to work to identify and share best practices that demonstrate promise to reduce delinquencies and disconnections with the explicit goal of increasing customers' capabilities to pay utility bills over time. The resolution encouraged all interested parties to work with all stakeholders, including utility companies, to collect and share data on arrearages and disconnections. The resolution suggested that states consider requiring utilities to collect monthly data that tracks a number of different issues, including uncollectibles, number of payment arrangements, number of payment arrangement defaults, number of revised payment arrangements, disconnections, reconnections, duration and frequency of disconnections, and other relevant data points. The resolution also suggested that states require utilities to make the data publicly available, including by filing the data with the State Public Utility Commission to be published on the Commission's website. In his memorandum, Dr. Mark explained that the National Consumer Law Center asked the OPC a series of questions in anticipation of the webinars that eventually led to the passage of the 2019 NARUC resolution. In his memorandum, Dr. Mark discussed how he attempted to answer the questions posed to the OPC by looking to the information available in the cold weather reports and the annual reports filed with the Commission. Based on this review, Dr. Mark made several conclusions, including that electric and gas utilities, but not water, report the number of disconnects in at least 2 periodic filings, but that the disconnect numbers were not consistent when examined on a year-to-year basis. Dr. Mark also concluded that the information is not always easily accessible, and that the information varied considerably based on the year and the utility reporting. Therefore, Dr. Mark noted that there did not appear to be an agreed-to standardization of data. Dr. Mark noted particularly that without agreed-to standardizations, wildly different conclusions can be drawn, and wildly different policy responses may arise. Dr. Mark ultimately recommended that the Commission open a rulemaking docket designed to standardize definitions, increase transparency, and draw greater attention to vulnerable customer populations. Based on the guidance provided by the 2019 NARUC resolution, and in an effort to address some of the inconsistencies Dr. Mark noted in his memorandum, the OPC drafted an initial proposed rule. Some of the highlights of that initial proposed rule is that it did not specify a location within the confines of the current Commission's rules. It included 13 definitions. It sought information from all investor-owned utilities in the state of Missouri and requested that they provide information responsive to 22 data reporting points. The rule also proposed that the staff of the Commission compile an annual customer disconnection report. The OPC attached a copy of the 2019 NARUC resolution, Dr. Mark's memorandum, and its initial proposed rule to its motion to establish a working group docket. After the Commission granted the OPC's request to establish the working group, the Commission granted the OPC's request to hold a workshop to discuss the initial proposed rule. That workshop was held virtually in November 2020. During the first workshop, Commissioner Coleman introduced the resolution and Dr. Mark presented information addressed in his memorandum. Specifically, Dr. Mark walked through the publicly available data and explained the inconsistencies. Following these presentations, an open discussion of the proposed definitions ensued. Because of time constraints, the November 2020 workshop did not discuss the data points to be reported on. The discussions that took place during the November 2020 workshop were productive. They highlighted the fact that utilities use different practices in tracking and reporting customer disconnections. Thinking back on where we've been, I'd now like to turn to where we are now. This section of the presentation will focus specifically on the OPC's revised proposed rule, which I hope you all have had a chance to review. Following the November 2020 workshop, the OPC substantially edited the initial proposed rule. The OPC included the revised proposed rule in both a clean version and a redline version, along with its filing to establish this workshop, which is document 29 in EFIS. The OPC made changes based on feedback from the filed comments, survey responses received, and those comments discussed at the November 2020 workshop. As you'll see today, we really took your feedback to heart and made substantial changes to the proposed rule. These tables compare some of the changes. First, as I mentioned with the initial proposed rule, we did not specify where the rule would be placed in the Commission's current rules. With the revised proposed rule, the OPC now proposes to place the rule in Chapter 13. Second, the initial proposed rule included 13 definitions. However, because the proposed rule, because the OPC now proposes to place the rule in Chapter 13, we've made edits to the rule so that it includes only 2 new definitions that apply to it in particular, residential meter and average customer arrearage, which we'll go over later today. And we've revised the rule to make use of the other Chapter 13 definitions. Third, although the November 2020 workshop did not include a discussion of the data reporting points, based on the feedback that we received, the OPC has reduced the number of requested data reporting points from 22 to 12. In describing these data points, the OPC has also included guidance as to the time period from which it requests the information. For instance, the rule now requests utilities to report the total number of residential meters as of midnight on the first calendar day of the month. Fourth, the initial proposed rule applied to all investor-owned utilities in the state of Missouri, regardless of size. With this revised proposed rule, the OPC now proposes that the rule apply only to investor-owned electric, gas, sewer, and water utilities that serve more than 2,000 residential customers. Finally, and I think this highlights just how much work we've done with this proposed rule, the initial proposed rule was approximately 1,500 words. With the revised proposed rule, we've cut that number nearly in half, and it comes in at approximately 780 words. So now I would like to conclude the presentation portion of today's workshop by talking a little bit about where the OPC would like to go after today's presentation. The OPC is looking forward to everyone's constructive feedback and suggestions for improvement for the revised proposed rule. Then, similar to what we did with the feedback from the from the November 2020 workshop, we will further revise the proposed rule. After making those revisions, the OPC plans to file a motion to open a rulemaking docket to formally begin the rulemaking process. The OPC hopes that this process leads to the promulgation of a final rule that seeks to meet the goals expressed in the 2019 NARUC resolution and addresses the problems Dr. Mark noted in his memorandum. The OPC anticipates filing the notice for the rulemaking docket by no later than the end of Q2 of 2022. That concludes the presentation portion of today's workshop. I would now like to turn to the more important portion of the workshop, the open discussion of the revised proposed rule. I am hopeful that everyone has had a chance to review the revised proposed rule in its entirety. The OPC, as I mentioned, filed both a clean version of that revised proposed rule and a red line version showing the changes from the initial proposed rule. With our remaining time, and I did want to let everyone know that we plan to break for lunch from 12 to 1, I want to take a bit of time to walk through each section of the revised proposed rule. I have a slide for each section and a few brief comments that point out some of the changes that the OPC made and, in some instances, a rationale behind those changes. After that, I will open the floor for discussion, so please feel free to jump in. This is going to be an informal discussion, so feel free to speak up. There's no need to use a raise hand feature or anything like that. I did want to let everyone know that the OPC is taking notes as well as recording today's workshop, and we will use your feedback when we revisit the revised proposed rule before filing the notice to open the rulemaking docket. So to begin, we'll start with the first definition, which is residential meters. This definition forms the unit of measurement for the revised proposed rule. Specifically, as you have seen in your review of the revised rule, the rule asks utilities to report things such as the total number of residential meters as of midnight on the first calendar day of the month. This is a large change from the initial proposed rule, which included a defined term, unique residential account. However, during the November 2020 workshop, there was a fairly robust conversation where the utilities described how they track accounts or customers. Through that discussion, it became apparent that utilities have different understandings of the word account, and the word can mean any one of several different things. To ensure that the data received in response to the revised proposed rule is consistent, the OPC created a standard unit of measurement, residential meters. Does anyone have any discussion on this definition?
This is Jermaine Grubbs for Ameren, Missouri. And I just wanted to, first off, say thank you for the opportunity to participate in this workshop, and we really appreciate you all refining your rule. We do have a couple of comments that we'll share, but specifically for this residential meter definition, we were curious that why we wouldn't use the term customer that's already defined in Chapter 13. Instead, what we're concerned about is potential confusion that this might present different data, and if it's compared to the cold weather rule reporting, which uses customer instead of residential meter, that there could be a mismatch.
Hey,
Yeah,
Joanne, this is Jeff Mark. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Jeff.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the rationale behind changing that was based off of feedback from the utilities. What I'm trying to recall, this is almost 2 years ago, you know, when we had that meeting or the last workshop, but the intent was that you could have multiple different meters under a customer's name. I'm looking around, was there?
Well, so part of the problem, this has already been addressed, this is Kleiser with OPC, by the way. You talked about a mismatch between the cold weather report and what we're proposing here, but remember that this entire situation was kicked off because the cold weather reports were themselves having a mismatch between the different utilities. And that mismatch appears to have resulted from inconsistencies with how the definition of customer was being considered by the utilities. So we didn't want to use that definition because, in our mind, that definition was in large part a culprit for why there was a mismatch in the first place. So, see, I understand your concern, but that's our answer, basically.
Any thoughts on that, Jermaine?
I do understand in reviewing what was presented, like you said, almost 2 years ago now. I understand. I guess it really is about if you're then comparing apples to apples or apples to watermelon. And it might just be that then these meter locations roll up into, you know, numbers. And so those will not be an apples to apples. That's what I was trying to highlight. But I understand trying to drill down to more granular data and the issue that John Kleiser raises.
Well, there won't be apples to apples comparison potentially between the cold weather reports and the report generated by this rule, but we are hoping, and let me know if this would be a problem, that there would be an apples to apples comparison between utilities under this rule. Do you see a reason why that wouldn't be the case?
Yeah, this is Julie Dragoo with Evergy, and you know, I think, and this was some of the conversation I had forgotten was all the way back in November of 2020, is really around a lot of how our billing systems, you know, collect and present data, right? So from an Evergy perspective, it would be difficult to report on a meter basis because our meters would not really collect the data around billing or payment arrangements or turn-ons, turn-offs, disconnects, because those are tied to an account or what we would call a service agreement. So from our perspective, and I would be curious, and knowing a lot of these utilities were reporting monthly through the, I can't remember the COVID docket, a lot of this information, if we feel like there's a gap there.
Hi, this is Diana with Liberty. I have a related question that actually ties back now with both of those comments. One referring to the cold weather rule, and then the other one referring to those data requests. And the question is how OPC sees this interacting with those other similar reporting, if this would replace anything or if it would be in addition to what we're doing now.
Hi, Diana. This is Lindsay. So OPC sees this report as in addition to the cold weather rule reporting.
That being said, we are kind of gearing them towards two specific objectives, which is the cold weather report is to directly address the cold weather rule, and this report is to directly address standardization of disconnect information.
So Lindsay, this is Wilbur Odom with Spire. I'm the manager of credit and collections, and I wanted just to mention that first, the definition of residential meter we felt matched more so the way our system works with SAs, service agreements, and matched better than trying to match on the account. So we we are fine with the change, and I know there was a lot of discussion last time with residential meter. And I know that there is going to be differences, we believe, with a couple of different reports, especially the co-weather rule monthly reports and also the Missouri PSC annual reports. And our request from Spire is that if we standardize, which is the whole purpose in our thought of this, that we could utilize this, and I agree with several others that just mentioned that is there a possible way that this report and these numbers, if they can replace the other reports and the other data in the other reports related to disconnects and AR related to disconnects.
Thanks, Wilburn. This is Jeff Mark with OPC. A couple thoughts, as we've got a series of statements from different utilities. First, to address sort of the inconsistencies, and I think Wilburn kind of summarized it, pretty well here. Some utilities are going to have to make some modifications to conform with this rule. That was implicit with the drafted memo, and the results that we got is right now we can't have an apples to apples comparison because everybody's doing things differently. Even trying to compare utilities across to try to have a good understanding of what's taking place across the cold weather rule is inconsistent. So this really is our attempt to make it an apples to apples comparison. In terms of replacing or standardizing, making this the uniform reporting metric moving forward, at this point, I agree with you. That makes intuitive sense that we shouldn't have duplicative services. It is also probably an issue that's beyond the scope of this presentation, but something worth having a dialogue about. Probably, with other stakeholders. I know the PSC's online now, and we've got, obviously a few commissioners and stuff, but to me, that makes sense. But as it stands, we're sort of operating within, the confines of this explicit workshop and this rule.
So Jeff, this is Wilburn again. I appreciate that. I was just hoping that there will be some understanding that those numbers may show different in the cold weather monthly reports and the annual reports, because they may be on an account level versus a service agreement, or in this the way we're going to measure this by residential meters. So there is going to be some consistencies even with that if we don't standardize, but just so everyone, agrees that or understands that there may be a difference in that comparison.
Thank you. And I'll just circle back because I know somebody, I think it was Julie, had referenced the COVID reports, the monthly COVID reports. And staff, feel free to speak up on this if you have an opinion. But one of the consistent themes that I've taken from reviewing those COVID reports is the same stuff that we've talked about from the initial memo, which is that there is inconsistencies across utilities in terms of how stuff was reported, the timing of those reports, and so far. So it's very difficult to glean any sort of information as to the nature of what's happening in terms of disconnects and arrearages. It's unfortunate that our workshop really did get postponed because of COVID, and everything got pushed back. It would have been great to have a standardization before COVID hit, as I'm sure we've all now experienced. Is there any other additional comments from any other utilities on this specific definition?
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. We'll now.
Hey, Lindsay, sorry, this is Julie Dragoo. Just one more question here. These would be active meters.
That is the active paid meters. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, perfect.
Right.
But Julie, as we go through the data points later, you'll see we do ask, for those meters that have been disconnected during the month. Does that make
Yes.
sense?
Yes, that makes sense.
Okay, great. So we'll move on to the second definition here, which is average customer arrearage. In their written feedback on the initial proposed rule, several utilities raised concern with the OPC's data point that requested the mean average dollar value of all delinquent charges currently outstanding as of the last day of the month. These concerns seem pointed at how best to calculate a response. The OPC included this definition in an effort to address some of that concern and again to ensure standardization of the data received in response to the rule. Specifically, this definition identifies the types of charges to be included and the formula used to calculate it. You will also notice again that the OPC included a specific time in this definition, which is as of midnight on the last day of the month. Does anyone have any discussion on this definition?
I apologize. Just a question. Is there so I was given the phone number and the meeting ID to call in to this meeting. Was there a link
Is that
of
Paul?
some type?
I'm sorry, who is speaking?
This is Paul,
Hey, Paul.
from Missouri American Water.
I'll go ahead and email it to you.
Okay, thanks. That would help.
Sure. Does anyone else need the link while we're on that topic?
Actually, you want to put it in the chat?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Jeff is going to put the link for the meeting today in the chat.
Wait, that wouldn't do him any good.
Oh, true. Never mind.
Never mind.
Paul, we'll get that link sent out to you, and if there's anyone else who needs the link, feel free to just speak up and let us know, and we'll get that link sent to you.
This is Martin Hyman. I'd like to have the link as well. Thank you.
Okay.
This is Georgie Donahue with Castle. I'd like to have the link too, please.
Got it, George.
This is Tracy Figueroa. If you could send me the link too, I'd appreciate it.
Will do.
Thank you.
So Lindsay, this is Wilbur Odom with Spire again. On the definition, we're fine, but on later in the document, it talks about from the first day to the last day of the month. But on the first day, it says the same thing of midnight on the first day. And that we thought could be just and I know this is very simple, but we just thought that could be confusing on referring to midnight of the first day to midnight on the last day. So I'm not sure if everybody understands that midnight on the first day means 12:01 forward, then just wanted to make sure that was mentioned.
You're referring to the start of the day versus the end of the day. Is that what I take that to mean?
I think somebody might take midnight on the first day as literally the last of the first day. And again, it's just wanted to make sure everybody that's very clear that we're not missing a day there, right?
That's a good point. It's a good point. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Odom. That actually takes us right into the next section here, which is the data points. So as you'll notice in the red line document that the OPC included with its filing to establish this second workshop, we made very substantial changes to our data points here, even though we did not discuss those during the November 2020 workshop. So many of the changes you'll see include things such as adding the new unit of measurement, residential meters, adding the specific time, which Mr. Odom, as you mentioned, might be a little bit confusing here on this first data point. And then 3, changing language to utilize the Chapter 13 definitions. once again, these changes are just in hopes to standardize the data that we receive in response to the new rule. So we'll go ahead and jump in with this first data point, which is the total number of residential meters as of midnight on the first calendar day of the month. And Mr. Odom, great point. Thank you. With midnight, we were referring to, I guess, 12:01 on the first calendar day, so that you capture the full first calendar day.
We may need to think of a better way to phrase that to directly address your comment, though.
Is there anyone who was who didn't have the link that we just sent, who's still trying to log on? Wanna leave anyone too far?
Paul, did you receive it? Marty? Georgie? Tracy?
Yep, Marty's here. Thanks,
This is
Jack.
Georgie. I got it.
Okay, thanks.
This is Tracy. I have it.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So did anyone else have anything on that first data point? Okay, we'll go to the second data point, which is just the inverse of the first, which is the total number of residential meters as of midnight on the last calendar day of the month. Here, the changes were similar, just adding the unit of measurement with residential meters and specifying the time frame. So here, midnight on the last calendar day of the month refers to the end of the last day. Okay, so now we'll go to the third. With this data point, the OPC made fairly substantial changes. We added the unit of measurement and changed the language to use the Chapter 13 term termination of service. Chapter 13 defines that term as a cessation of service requested by a customer. Does anyone have any feedback on this data point?
This is Wilburn again. Is this only involuntary as far as termination of service? The word termination, I guess, can be interpreted differently. So we're only talking about involuntary termination of service to be included in the count, correct?
Hey, Wilburn, it's actually funny you should mention that. The OPC has had some concern at prior points regarding the actual usage of the terms in Chapter 13. But for this case, we're using it a defined term in the rule. And under the rule, a termination of service is one that's requested by the customer. So under the definitions in the rule, this would only count voluntary disconnections. That's at least our understanding of it. And I invite anybody else to speak up if they think differently.
This is Contessa with staff, and that's correct. That definition is 13.015. And if you look at EE, you'll see the definition for termination of service.
Okay, so I'm sorry, just to clarify, so we do not want in this item, we do not want involuntary termination. We do not want disconnects for non-pay. We only want voluntary requests for service turnoffs or stop service in this number.
That would be our yes.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Should we consider changing the language here to say termination of service as defined and reference the provision? I don't know.
That's certainly a thought. The definition section in Rule 13, I believe, defines the terms for their use throughout the entire rule. So the hope would be that that would govern without the need to expand further but it's certainly something we can consider.
Or adding the word voluntary termination. So,
Wilburn, you're, I agree with you. I mean, like largely, and that was sort of where we were at in the last workshop, is that the Chapter 13 rules could be, in my opinion, drafted a little bit different to be more clearer on that. Based off of feedback that we got, we elected to try to go the path of least resistance and not mess with the Chapter 13 rules as we could have, because there would, if we put that in there, there would be inconsistencies in the rest of the chapter. So effectively, by messing with that, we would have to open up all of the Chapter 13 rules, if that makes sense.
oh yeah.
Hey, Jeff, this is Bush from PSC, and you guys hit this on number in D. You talk about a discontinuance of service, and you state as that term is used in 20 CSR 4240 13.050. So, and that is defined as discontinuance of service, or discontinuance means a cessation of service not requested by a customer. So isn't C getting to it when it's terminated by the customer, and D is getting to it when it is discontinuous by the utility? Isn't that the difference?
That is the difference. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think so C is just one is when it's voluntary, and D is when it's not voluntary.
Yeah. And Jim, all I would say is this would be a whole lot simpler if I could just say that, right? C is voluntary and D is involuntary. But if I did that, then that would mess all the other.
And I guess my point is, because it's being used as the definition is already in Chapter 13, that's the difference. And just under, pointing out to that, as I think Contessa said, it gets your point without having to say that. At least that's how I interpreted it as I read it. So I think it's clear. But
Thank you. That helps.
I'm sorry, we were talking and we were muted. I see what you're talking about, Jim and Contessa. We can clear that up.
So move forward one to D, and let's address this, because in D, I'm sorry, I'm cutting ahead of you. Here, let me actually hand you back. Go ahead.
Yeah, so just jumping ahead to D here, D is, as we were saying, a discontinuance of service. So this is, and we refer to that term as used in 20 CSR 4240-13.050 1A, B, C, and E. Now that reference is actually to the cold weather rule, and those subsections include non-payment of an undisputed delinquent charge, failure to post a required deposit or guarantee, water service may be discontinued for non-payment of a bill for sewer service, either provided by the water utility if it is also the sewer utility, or by the terms of a contract between the water utility and any sewer provider, and failure to comply with the terms of a settlement agreement. So this does kind of get to that difference we were discussing, where C is when the disconnection is requested by the customer, and D is when the disconnection is not requested by the customer and is done for a non-payment reason.
Hey, Lindsay, and I may have misheard you, but I believe you said that's under the cold weather rule, but that's actually under discontinuance of service.
Oh,
which is 13.050.
Thank you. I might have misspoke then.
That's
Thank you.
okay.
So if you'll all bear with us for just a second, Lindsay, can you bring up the the CSR for chapter 13?
Yes. And if everyone will, this might be a little shaky, so.
So because we've discussed it, we just want to reference this really quickly here. There is a section in this rule. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, John, I didn't mean to cut you off, but can everyone see the CSR right now? Can anyone confirm that for me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So I'm going to get to that 13.050 section that this references. So it's right here, discontinuance of service. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so we can see that.
So the chapter 13 rules in general have a definition section that define the terms termination of service and then discontinuance of service. In its original definition section, which is 015, I think, is that right? And then they have a second section on just discontinuance of service, which is why you see the reference that you do in sub D of our proposed rule as opposed to sub C. So where this gets confusing is because we are referencing two different parts of the rule, but it's just because of the way that the rule itself is set up.
If I heard staff correctly, and Jim, this is where I'm looking to you to correct me. What you would suggest is to take C and add and reference back to the first part of that rule?
I think it'd be beneficial.
Okay.
When you say the first part, we're referencing back to the definitions.
Yeah. Yeah, we can do that.
Contessa, do you agree with that?
I mean, that was my initial suggestion, but, you know, if folks are in favor of it, fine. If not, you know.
I think we're in favor of it. Thanks.
And I hope this makes clear, to Irwin, who was speaking earlier from Spire, how we are trying to use the definitions in the rule itself to define what are effectively voluntary and involuntary disconnects. So we would hope that the rule would perform the guidance and make clear to the utilities exactly which are being included in each of those two sections. And if not, you know, if a utility thinks this isn't clear, this would be the best time to speak up and explain.
This is Wilbur Odom with Spire, yes. That helps. There was just some confusion on that on my part, but that helps. The only follow-up I had is, and I guess need to look just a little bit further for this, but does this requirement call for arrearages for deposits as well?
Mr. Odom, could you explain just a little bit what you mean by that?
So for deposits that are billed and may remain unpaid, or even the credit of deposits, I'm just thinking really more tactical about how to pull the report and how to handle deposits. But this is really, we're talking about D, we're talking about the total number of residential meters where there is discontinuance of service. So I guess more so I'm thinking of if we disconnect for a deposit. I'm just thinking out loud, I'm sorry.
So we have identified subsection B of the definition of discontinuance of service, which, if you're going to highlight that, yes. Lindsay, that includes a failure to post a required deposit or guarantee. So I think that the answer to your question is yes, it would include deposits.
Okay.
As we've defined it.
All right, thank you.
And this is, oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Jermaine.
I was going to shift just a little bit to just clarify that when you look at 2C and 2D, then because it's basing it off of the total number of residential meters, that slices the data that we provide in the cold weather report under 15A1 just a little differently, right? Because that cold weather rule report is on a customer disconnection at the end of that period. So again, I just wanted to clarify that it's not going to be an apples to apples necessarily. This slices the data just a little differently. Just wanted to highlight that for clarification.
Yeah, and Jermaine, 100% agree. And perhaps maybe we're confusing what apples we're comparing to. When I say apples to apples, I'm meaning really across utilities, not this compared to the cold weather rule.
Or the annual report, or okay, yes, that helps. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. We'll go back.
Quick clarification, since we're referencing in the A, B, C, E, we're just looking for a total number there. Is that correct? Not a breakdown of each of those things.
Intention was a total number, yes. Not a breakdown.
Yeah, perfect.
Subsection.
That is it. Yep.
Perfect.
And this is Rachel with Spire. To go back to what Jermaine was referencing, if staff or OPC do notice a discrepancy among the reports, can we get some sort of verification that they will reach out to the utilities just to verify? Because it would be most likely a way that we've pulled the information for the report. So we just ask that you all keep that in mind as you see the different reports and the numbers might not match up.
Sure, Rachel. I guess definitely when this rule, gets implemented and we roll it out, I think there's going to be a lot of eyes on it and, making sure that everybody's doing what we hope they're doing. So we can absolutely communicate with the utilities.
Thank you.
Okay, great. We'll head back to the presentation now.
You're back.
Okay, so now we'll go to data point E. Here, the OPC made changes to address several utilities' concerns as to what this data point intended to capture. Here, the OPC hopes to capture all residential meters that did not receive service as of midnight on the first calendar day of the month. And again, we'll think about how best to change that wording so that it's clear that we want the full first calendar day, and began receiving service before midnight on the last calendar day of the month. Because at least one utility mentioned the difficulty in tracking whether a customer received service for the first time or if the customer simply began receiving service again, the OPC has removed reference to receiving service for quote unquote the first time and broadened this data point to include all residential meters that did not receive service on the first day and at some point during the month began receiving service. Does anyone have any discussion on this data point?
So Lindsay, this is Wilbur Odom again from Spire. So when you say all meters, we were under the assumption that this referred to the discontinuance of service only accounts. But you're telling us that this now is that it's the total number of residential meters, that it's not just for those referring to the discontinuance of service.
Correct.
Does that make sense?
What this data point is tracking is effectively the number of meters, as we've defined it, that are connected to the system in a month, not that are disconnected. It's from how many that did not receive service at the start of the month who are now receiving service. So it's people getting on the system, not getting off.
Okay, thank you.
And so this is Julie Drago again for Evergy. And just good to talk kind of like we did in just more clearer terms, kind of over these are the voluntary shut-offs, these are the involuntary. Is the data point we're trying to gather here specific to just the number of accounts that were turned on, meters, customers. I asked because are we really trying to capture? I had an involuntary turn off. I'm Julie Dragu. I'm moving across town. I have a turn off at this, and I have a turn on at this in a 2-day window.
Sorry, that's a little bit more complex. Give me just a second to think through that one.
Hi, Julie. I just wanted to let everyone know we're discussing this. We'll be back with you
Oh,
as soon as we
okay.
can.
Yeah, sounds good.
Hi, thanks, Julie. We were checking our notes, and it looks like this was based off of the Naruc resolution that was looking at just the number of connections. So that's we're trying to be consistent with that.
So maybe clarify that a little bit more for me, Jeff. Just new connections, meaning I'm a brand new person or at a
This
brand
comes down
new.
to how the definition of residential meter works as we've included it in here. So in your example, a customer stops receiving service at location A, moves to location B, and begins receiving service at location B. That customer would be would count under this data point because they have changed the service location where they're receiving service. I'm repeating myself a lot. And that's how
That's
we
okay.
defined residential meters.
And
Correct.
Julie, this is Lindsay. I also wanted to say, in your example, you were saying a brand new customer. So that is one of the changes we made from our initial proposed rule. This refers. It doesn't have to be a brand new customer. It could be, as you said in your example, where someone sells their home. So that there's a termination of service under C because the customer requested it. They move across town, they have a new connection at their new home, that would count here because it's no longer just about a brand new customer or a new account. It's just that that residential meter started receiving service during the month.
So they could be counted in both really C and E.
That's correct.
Okay. That helps because then that to me translates into any new turn on in the month would be counted. And I don't mean new like to customers, but a turn on situation would be counted in this data point.
It all comes down to that very first definition we discussed. That was the key to a lot of these is attempting to define everything in terms of utility service being provided to a specific identifiable location, a single meter effectively. And that's just how we were building up the data points to try and get a consistent information across multiple utilities.
Hi, this is Christopher Galliano at Spire. I just want to make sure with this particular discussion that we are talking about all accounts or all meters that are turned on that were turned off that had been off, because that example that we just gave could be that the person is establishing service at the new home and the meter is already on and the gas is already flowing, where it's just a transfer of service. So we're talking about reconnecting the gas at the meter if it is a transfer, correct?
That one is actually slightly, I guess I maybe not had thought all the way through that one. So for example, if a customer moves into a house, gas service is already being supplied to the house, but the customer is basically taking over the account or taking over responsibility for paying for the service effectively. Is that roughly what we're talking about?
Well, I just wanted to make sure that that is not what we're counting in this, where the gas is already on at that location, correct?
Yeah, we would have the same situation in an electric example, the one I gave where customer A moves out and B moves in.
Well, I mean, if I understand it right, then that would be a meter that's still receiving service. I mean, it might be, so,
So yeah, that would not be counted as it
Right.
is written.
right?
And as
Great.
John,
That's the way I interpreted the discussion.
Yeah, and this just emphasizes the fact that, you know, we had to pick one thing or another. It was either meters or accounts, and meters seemed like a more sensible approach.
Okay, sorry to keep honing in on this one. So this is really going to be more about physical disconnections and physical reconnections.
so the way this is written is looking at the meter, is the meter receiving service? If no on the first day of the month, but the meter starts receiving service under any name sometime throughout the month before the last day of the calendar month, then it would be counted. Does that help at all? So the way residential meter is defined, it's unaffected by the name on the account. It's just the meter. We look at the meter.
This is not concerned about transfer of service, just new service. Turning on service, I shouldn't use the word new.
Yes, that's
Yeah, I think it gets awkward for particularly Evergy because the name on the account is what drives a disconnect or drives arrears or drives those kinds of things. So trying to keep this consistent throughout all of these requests then become difficult. Does that make sense?
Thanks, Julie. We've taken the notes. We
Yeah.
might follow up with you after this, okay?
Yep, sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, was there anything else on this data point? Okay, we'll turn now to data point F. Here, the OPC made changes to include the Chapter 13 definition of delinquent charge and specified that delinquent charge must exist as of midnight on the last calendar day of the month. And again, the OPC made these changes to specify the charges to which the data point refers. Is there any discussion on this data point?
So the definition of delinquent charges, does this match 13, what is it, 13.015I?
Yes.
That's where the definition is coming from, correct?
Yes, it is from the Chapter 13 definition of delinquent charge.
And our only, again, this is, our only thing was the question of, is this just for gas service or other AR, things like other type delinquent charges?
Mr. Odom, we're gonna look right back at that Chapter 13 definition. We'll be right back.
Mr. Odom, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So honestly, looking at the definition, I'm not sure that I would have a good answer for you. It would appear to be ambiguous as it's defined, at least potentially somewhat. So I guess to the extent that Spire would characterize it as a delinquent charge under this definition, then they should report it as such per the rule, or per the proposed rule.
Yeah, Mr. Odom, you had mentioned that there, I guess, different types of delinquent charges. Is that the concern?
Well, if you notice going from F to even H and some of the others, it talks about a residential meter's delinquent charges. So just making sure that are we saying all delinquent charges, like I would assume that it would be for gas service here, delinquent charges based on the feel of the rule, but you know, there are other delinquent charges out there, like, you know, they're delinquent charges out there. So I just a clarification of that.
This is Rachel with Spire. John, your comment was helpful for however we interpret it to be a delinquent charge. That's what we would need to pull. Is that what you said? Did I say that? Did I hear that correctly?
Well, I guess really what I'm saying is that the rule definition controls. So we're not asking for anything different than whatever the definition under subsection 15I of this rule is. That's what I meant to say. I'm not sure what I said before.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Is there any other feedback on this data point?
Yeah, I think just a clarification, this is Julie Dragu again. For delinquent charge, just is that considered anything in arrears? Back to when we get to the arrears conversation.
It would be, Julie.
Yeah, perfect. Just making sure I'm thinking in that way. And then just that kind of goes back to the conversation we just had. Because meters don't really carry the charges, that's carried as at a customer. You know, they could still be in delinquency and not in service, right? So
Okay.
yeah, we just want to think through that when we talk about definitions.
Okay. So now we'll move on to G, which is at the average customer arrearage. So this simply asks for what is defined in the definition. And as I mentioned, that definition includes what is supposed to be included in the calculation and the calculation itself. Does anyone have any feedback on this data point? Okay, moving on to H. So the OPC made very minor changes to this data point. We just added the abbreviation for LIHEAP, updated to include the new unit of measurement with residential meters, and changed charges to charge so that it was very clear that we were using the Chapter 13 term delinquent charge. Does anyone have any discussion on this data point?
Hi, this is Julie with Spire. I have a question on this one. So do you want the payments broken out by what amount went to the arrearage? Because that might be a little bit hard for us to get.
Could you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. So we have, when LIHEAP payments, when the EA portion or the ESIP portion get paid, it obviously goes to, arrearage first. So, past debt, and it also goes to current too. So I was just wondering if you want just the payment amount, or do you want how much of it went to arrears, how much of it went to current?
Oh, just the payment amount.
Just the payment amount?
That's right.
Okay. Thank you.
And just looking at this now, we will update this specific data point to capture water assistance as well. So they didn't, that's now in effect. That wasn't in effect when we originally drafted this.
This is Georgie from Castle. So I have a question about this too, because with the initial EA payment, especially now since they have been doubled to 636 and 652, in instances, we could be creating a credit on the person's account. So it's not all necessarily going towards a delinquent amount, as this states. And then also remember that a disconnect notice is no longer required for LIHEAP for the crisis programs. So it could be a current bill and not a delinquent charge. So if you're just tracking all low-income LIHEAP payments, it's not going to be just delinquent charges.
So, Georgie, I'm going to try to simplify this for everybody. Like, we're just looking to see how much federal dollars the utility got. So we can clean this up to say just that.
Yeah, so maybe just remove the word delinquent.
I think that would do it. And, we'll capture ESIP as well, and then the LIWAP dollars. So but we could just say federal dollars assistance. I guess we could even say state if that happens to get renewed again. Good point. Thank you.
And
Hey
as
Jeff, this is Marty. Just a quick question. I presume you're not trying to capture weatherization dollars with this, correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Okay. Moving to our next data point, this is a brand new data point, and it may change as well, capturing the total dollar value received from the Energy Crisis Intervention Program.
Yeah, this is we'll revise this. This is one of the last one, and make it a little bit more broader in terms of just federal subsidies.
And we might revise this one as
It's just
well.
what it is, yeah.
Can you go back to 2 slides to that one, the first one that?
Is it this one?
That one. Okay, yeah. So if you're wanting to break apart the ESIP from the EA, both of those are LIHEAP. LIHEAP has 2 components, EA, the Basic Heat Grant, Energy Assistance, and then the crisis money. So this, as it's worded, would be total inclusive of EA and ESIP. Is that what you're asking, or did you just want that basic EA? Because your next slide indicates just the crisis money.
No, I mean, honestly, Georgie, I think at this point, I think we're going to have to just be more broad and not worry about that. Again, like when I would argue even now you've got stuff like SAFER and everything else that are, contributing dollars. So I think I don't know the real value of definitely of breaking that out.
So then you may not need that slide where you're asking for the ESIP because you're already capturing it here.
That is correct.
It's highly
Okay.
likely at this point, based on the conversations, that H, I, and J may be combined into a single broad request for either federal or state financial assistance.
Good catch. Thank you.
Okay. We'll now go to data point K. So the OPC's initial rule referenced an affordability payment plan, which referred to a commission-approved plan offered at the utility's option, in which a customer provides for the payment of any outstanding delinquent charges accrued to that customer for regulated utility services as a condition of receiving continued services. During our November 2020 workshop, several utilities expressed concern with that definition and stated that they utilize several different types of payment plans. Based on that feedback, the OPC made changes to this data point to use the Chapter 13 definitions for settlement agreement, payment agreement, and then payment plans in general. Chapter 13 defines a settlement agreement as an agreement between a customer and a utility which resolves any matter in dispute between the parties or provides for the payment of undisputed charges over a period longer than the customer's normal billing period. The cold weather rule provides guidance for what is to be included in a payment agreement, including how payments are to be calculated. Does anyone have any discussion on this data point?
This is Wilbur Odom with Spire. So if we have a final bill collection of an older amount, and there is with our third-party collections a settlement agreement, we're not talking about that. I would think, at least in my opinion, we're talking about a customer that has services under a payment plan, or if there is a dispute while they're active and there's a settlement, which may happen, or there's a payment agreement. That is the thought of this, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. That was our only comment on this one.
Yeah, and Julie Dragu, I think I appreciate the putting it as a point in time. So how many of these people were on this arrangement or plan at the specific point in time? So I think that's a good clarification for us.
So this is Rachel with Spire. For settlement agreement, did you provide a definition, Lindsay? My concern is that can relate to a complaint, that can be a legal document that's confidential, not necessarily related to that. Have you guys factored that into this consideration?
Rachel, that's a good point. So the reason we're using those terms is those are defined terms in Chapter 13 of the Commission's rules. So we may, as we've talked about with a few of the other data points, think about including that language that, referencing the Chapter 13 rollback.
Yeah, I would make the comment too that to get to the data points that this rule seems to be related to, the payment plan and payment agreement would be sufficient and avoids any kind of conflict with getting into a settlement agreement from a complaint case that might be unrelated to that.
Thank you. We will look at the definitions and see whether or not we can remove that one.
Yeah, and this is Julie Dragu again. I would just offer that for Evergy, you look at these while they may be for different reasons as the same. So to split them out in that level of detail would be difficult.
And Julie, I just want to clarify, I don't think we were asking anyone to split them out for each of these. It was just the total number.
Right. No, but I think the comment previously was to remove settlement agreement, but for us, a settlement agreement, a payment agreement, they all are treated the same. So we would be capturing all of those things.
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Lindsay. Could we go back to Jay? This is Julie from Spire.
Sure. Here you go.
I just have a quick question on that one. Would we be able to get anything written in there about it says total dollar value of any monies? Could we have it known monies? Because if an agency that would have federal funding that might not go through our pledge website and we aren't aware of these federal dollars, it might get posted as a customer payment. And so we wouldn't know that federal money existed.
That's a good point.
Okay.
And keep in mind again that we are
Thank you.
be rewriting these sections in their entirety based on all the other feedback, but we understand what you're saying, and that seems like a reasonable change. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, so now we'll go on to data point L.
Okay.
So in response to at least one utility's question about what volume of service this data point referred to, the OPC included here that it refers to the billed volume of services. The OPC also made other grammatical changes and added a reference to all residential meters and took out the reference to steam heating. Does anyone have any feedback on this data point?
This is Wilbur Odom with Spire. I was reading through, and all points make sense relating to the feel of the rule, but I just thought, and I'm just asking this question, this one seems out of place. All others are talking about disconnect balances and delinquent dollars, but this one goes into kind of a different item of billed volumes of all services. Is there a reason for this one being kind of out of place? I hope my question sounds understand.
It's a data point that was of interest of stakeholders, so we included it.
Okay.
This is Jermaine Grubbs for Ameren, Missouri, and I guess I just wanted to make sure how this would be calculated, and I think there was perhaps some concern that at 20 days after the end of a prior month, we can't have estimated bills or cancel rebills, and so would do our best in that calculation, but it would require some special query logic to be developed as well. Thank you.
Okay. We'll take that under advisement, Jermaine. I mean, my thinking is that utilities, provide this information in one form or another to EIA or other entities. It's routinely comes up in rate cases where a utility will say, well, this is what the impact's going to be on a given, our rate increase is going to impact the typical customer is this. We're just trying to get a sense of what the typical customer is.
This is Lisa Starkey-Baum with Evergy. Just a quick question on this. Are we intending to use a calendar month versus a billing month?
Yes.
Like a calendar month.
A calendar month, correct.
It would probably be rather difficult to use a billing month simply due to the differences in billing months between utilities.
Yep.
And we can make that change to
We
make
can say
that
calendar.
clear here.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Hi, this is Tracy Figueroa, and I have a question on this. So we have many flat rate customers, especially for wastewater. So how that aren't, we don't have any volumetric data. How would you, is there something else that cares for that in a different data point, or?
Do you have a suggestion, Tracy?
The only thing that we could do is really report out how many customers are on flat rate potentially. Because we don't get any type of data from, like if we're not the water provider,
Right.
and then it's just based on flat rate.
That's a very good point.
It's a great point. Yeah. Thanks.
I think this rule might need to be clarified that these are for customers being billed on a volumetric rate, and then we'll potentially take your suggestion of just asking for the number on flat rates or something similar.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you. So now we'll move to, so that gets us through the data points, and we'll now move into the subsections here. So the first is subsection 3. This pertains to deficiencies. The OPC made one grammatical change here and added that the notice and the response shall be filed in EFIS. Does anyone have any feedback on this subsection? Okay, moving on.
This is sorry, Lindsay. This is Rachel from Spire. On that last sentence, both the notice and the response shall be filed in EFIS by the staff of the commission. That seems a little onerous to staff because it's going to be the company's response. So I was just wondering where that word originated.
I think that originated due to some limitations in EFIS that we were concerned about, but we'll look back at that and see if we can't get that clarified.
Thank you. And then the other question I had on this is whether or not we should include in the rule sort of an informal discussion amongst OPC and staff and the company rather than directly going to the commission.
Really quick, Rachel, is your concern that somebody might have an issue with the numbers reported, or because this here is only meant to be a data point is not reported, not that there is some discrepancy or concern regarding it?
Great, that's a helpful clarification.
At least that was how I would understand the term deficiency. I don't know if anybody else felt differently.
I would agree with you, Rachel. I mean, I think it would make sense to have the company, speak with staff and OPC beforehand if, if there's some concerns. But we can take that under advisement.
This is John Kaufman with Consumers Council, and I just wanted to just make sure, I don't necessarily have a preference as to how it's posted, but I want to make sure that this information is public information and transparent for the world to see. And just want to make sure if it's provided directly or indirectly through staff and public counsel, there's some concern that wouldn't be. So as long as the final product is something that's going to be public, referenced by whoever wants to reference it, and it's easily transparent and accessible, that's what we're hoping for.
Hey, John, you just wait, because the next couple of subsections are gonna
knock your socks off.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure we're overall not losing sight of that.
Yep, thanks.
No, we are very aware of that concern, and you'll see that we've taken steps to address that particular issue.
And that actually takes us right into the next subsection, which is publicly accessible. The OPCs didn't make any changes to this subsection from our initial proposed rule. It simply changed the number of the subsection when we cut out a previous subsection that was included. So does anyone have any feedback on this subsection? Okay, great. And that actually brings us to our last point here, which is subsection 5. This talks about the report. The OPC made minor changes here, simply changing the title of the report to Annual Residential Customer Disconnection Report, just to make clear that this is for residential customers only. We also extended the time frame for staff to compile the report from 15 to 45 days. Does anyone have any feedback on this subsection? Okay, great. That actually gets us through the revised proposed rule. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to both prepare for today's workshop and for attending and giving us your feedback. We really appreciate it. This has been helpful for us. And as I mentioned, we'll take your feedback, revisit our revised proposed rule, and hopefully file the notice of rulemaking no later than the end of Q2 of this year. Does anyone have anything before we end today's meeting? Okay, great. Thank you all for coming. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day and a great weekend.
Thank
Lindsay.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Everybody.
Sheriff.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Make sure you stop the recording before you end the meeting. Don't stop the recording first.